The Politics podcast brought to you, as always, by everybody who supports us at TakePoliticsSeriously.com. A reminder, if you want to get the politics fan in your life, a Politics t-shirt, or our brand new Less Bullshit, More Horseshit t-shirt, head on over to stickers or DIAF.com. But enough of talking about how we support the show. What do you say we just do the damn thing?
Politics. Yes. Come on.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Politics Podcast. You know there is only one, my friend. Only one independent show out here. I ain't affiliated. I ain't gang affiliated. I'm just here for you. I'm here for you, the common folk, the decent, hardworking Americans who are trying to do their best to make their way in this political minefield we call modern discourse. We're going to talk about a lot. The rapidly complicating Mueller investigation. We're going to talk about, do you remember me? I will remember you. Picture of Avenatti 2020. Don't let your life pass you by. Weep not for the memory. Single tear. Memories. Avenatti 2020 is over. Or is it? A conspiracy lies before you. And also, I'm going to analyze a very important picture. But first, we begin with George W. Bush. Rather, George H.W. Bush. The original George Bush. What to say about the 41st president of the United States? Often kind of thought to be a bit of a footnote between Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. There seems to be a moment that was had over the last few days where, aside from, some tryhards on Twitter and in the blogosphere, there seemed to be kind of a inflection point of like remembering when the president was just a guy in the White House and not necessarily the totem for which we defined any and all ideals, friendships, and relationships, romantic or otherwise. George W. Bush was kind of a boring civil servant, or at least that's how he was portrayed in the media. Again, overshadowed by Captain Charisma and Ronald Reagan and the most popular Democrat since Kennedy pre-Obama in Bill Clinton. But there's almost something refreshing about remembering that. There's almost something exciting, weirdly enough, that it's like, oh, that was a time. You could like the president, you could not like the president, you could be in his party and not like him, and it wasn't like everything was gang warfare. You almost have to wonder if that's lost forever. Probably not. That's a little dramatic. But I do think that idea is an oversimplification. He was far more interesting and far more exciting, I think, the more that you looked into him than he might initially appear. Part of it is because he was not one to build a cult of personality around himself. I often sort of just bake into all of my thoughts about politicians that nobody really wants to shy away from the cameras. If you really wanted to shy away from the cameras, you wouldn't have run for office. Running for office might be one of the most harmful, damaging, disruptive things that you could ever do to a family, and yet people do it all the fucking time. And there's no doubt that his position, not only as a senator and a CIA director, as a vice president, presidential candidate, took a toll on his family. There's also no denying that George H.W. Bush was a fascinating figure who was only fascinating if you cared to look into him. There's a moment at the end of his funeral today when his eldest son, George W. Bush, with tears rolling down his face, said that, "I know that you'll be holding Rosemary's hand in heaven." No, sorry, Robin's. Jesus. I'm working on a Kennedy family thing, and now I have the Kennedys on the brain. "I know you'll be holding Robin's hand in heaven, and I know you'll be able to hug Mom." A lot of people might not have been aware of who Robin was, but Robin was the Bush's first child. She died very young, and the more you read into that family, the more you understand that it really devastated them. And it made their relationship with their subsequent children, as much more complicated as anybody who loses a child young. I think she was 4, too. It was like old enough to know who she was, but young enough that you couldn't really say that she lived any kind of life. But compare that for a moment. The idea that I'm sure that a lot of people who know a lot about George H.W. Bush, just ask all the 90s political experts in my Twitter timeline. They may not have known that they had a daughter that they lost. Compare that to John Edwards, who made, it was almost famous because he repeated it so much, a story about him cradling his dead child in the morgue and promising him a better world. Now, I'm not saying that John Edwards' morals are out of whack. I think that you can point to a few other things that spell that out clearly. I don't know what losing a child can do to somebody. But I do know that George H.W. Bush oftentimes did not want to make that his own gain. He didn't want to make his own pain something that he could use to market himself, despite the fact that that kind of stuff is talked about for a very specific reason, because it gives somebody a window into your soul to connect with. Something that I've read a lot over the last few days is that the GOP has changed a lot since George H.W. Bush was president, to which I say, no shit. All things change. Political parties change. Democracy changes. Coalitions change. This is the way of things. Nothing is for sure. Nothing lasts forever. But until they close the curtain, it's him and I, Aquemini. Like, that's just the way the news goes. George H.W. Bush was probably, and his son, to a certain extent, the last of a uneasy marriage between a certain country club republicanism and family values, religious republicanism, conservatism. Both of those have by and large been replaced by populism. I mean, that's what Donald Trump's proud flag is. He is a nationalist, and that is something that changes. The idea that these parties have remained static, I think, is totally folly. Now, I could go on. I had a little comment on the PX3 Extra on Monday about George H.W. Bush, and we're gonna have another little remembrance for him a little later in the show. But I want to please have you guys do something. All right, if you like this show, I need you to go download and listen to Andrew Heaton's show, Something's Off. I like to think, I haven't told him this yet, but I like to think that we're building ourselves a little coalition around these parts, right? That he does a show that airs 5 days a week. It's 4 days where it's a very specific kind of show, and then on the fifth day, he does a little bit more of an in-depth interview with people. But I want you to listen to 2 episodes. I want you to listen to last Thursday's, or maybe it's last Wednesday's, ya boy, Justin Robert Young is on. But more specifically, since we're talking about George H.W. Bush, please listen to his show on Monday. It's all one mic, like I'm doing now. But he does a much better job than I would of laying out the history and the life of George H.W. Bush. We're going to talk a little bit more about his legacy in the mailbag, and we have a tribute to him a little bit later. But for right now, let me just say R.I.P. to a man who brought class and dignity to the office, a man who knew how to laugh at himself, a man who I think deserves a tribute, even if you didn't agree with him. I think that there's something to be learned from him. So R.I.P. George H.W. Bush. Aside from the fact that we're always going to have beef because he brought cartoon all-stars to the rescue into my life, which I was simultaneously totally scarred by as a child and now treasure. So there we go. That is the President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, sat with his wife, Barbara, and looked me right in the eyes and said, "This is a great cartoon starring all of your favorite cartoon characters in one place, telling you a very important message about drugs." And then proceeded to be like this brain-melting psychedelic trip of like, literally they're trying to make drugs not cool, and they make drugs going on a roller coaster. That's the metaphor they use. A roller coaster. A thing found in an amusement park. Okay. Go listen to Andrew Heaton's podcast, and then at reply Mighty Heaton and say Justin R. Young recommended we go listen to this. We're building, look, this fucking coalition of everybody who's not going to try and kill each other. We're going to do it. We're going to build it brick by fucking brick. We found an ally. Let's bring them in. I want to remind everybody that the Free Political newsletter is indeed free, political, and a newsletter. If you like to listen to me, then holy shit, are you going to love reading the 5 stories I thought were the biggest stories in the political news day every single morning. Goes out at 12:15 a.m. Eastern Time. It is 5 stories, 5 days a week, mostly gifts, some hot takes. Andrew Heaton does not have a free political newsletter. I mean, he already does a fucking podcast about politics better than I do. You need me to do fucking everything? I can't have anything? What am I, chopped liver? All right. The Mueller investigation is certainly rolling. Things seem to be wrapping up. We now have multiple reports saying that Mueller is authoring the final report on this, although the question of exactly who will read it still remains up in the air. We don't know, once it is turned into the Attorney General, whether or not it will remain private, whether or not we will get a redacted version. In these modern times, something tells me that it might get leaked. But for now, we have probably the most concrete evidence that things are beginning to wrap up. And those are sentencing memos. Basically, the people that have cooperated with the Mueller investigation are now beginning to be sentenced. The one last night was General Flynn. General Flynn, if you might remember, was the brief national security advisor. Tell you what, I wish that those BitTorrent live broadcasts were still archived somewhere. I hope they were archived somewhere, because there was a moment at the end of night 1 or 2 of the Republican National Convention that was going so long. Oh my God, was that night going super long. And then Flynn, just enamored with the crowd, is standing up there leading a lock her up chant when they're like 2 hours over time. And I just started yelling at him. I was the anchor of the live stream coverage, and I just started yelling at this dude. Well, his sentencing memo is in. Here are the highlights. Half of it was redacted. We do know that Mueller and Flynn met 19 times. Mueller said that he gave content and context to campaign and transition team communications with Russia. Remember, Flynn had to resign because he had initially lied to Mike Pence about a conversation that he had with Sergei Kislyak, an envoy from Russia. That's why he got the boot. But he was a controversial pick to begin with. Mueller has recommended the lowest sentencing threshold. Which means he will likely get no jail time. The question here is, of course, what on earth did he tell Mueller? And does it create a direct connection between Donald Trump and Russia, and specifically prove that there was collusion? I'm going to say this, like I have said this many weeks in the past. If they're going to try and prove collusion, and they don't have a lot more than we know right now, man, I don't know what we're going to be looking at. Now, if he has a lot more, that's a different story. That's a horse of a different color. And by a lot more, I mean like concrete evidence. Emails. People on the record saying, I took this information from a Russian contact and I brought it to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump said, thank God, I knowingly understand what you're bringing me. And now I'm going to take this action, and then we can corroborate that action. That's what you need. Collusion's very hard. Proving collusion is like proving to Dave Chappelle in that Chappelle Show sketch that R. Kelly peed on that girl. They're going to need moving video. The girl's going to have to show 2 forms of ID. You're going to have 3 or 4 of his friends in the background with Neil taking notes, and have R. Kelly's grandma in the corner. Like, you need a lot of shit. You need a lot of shit there. Now. To say that Donald Trump obstructed justice, way easier. Way easier. And that's so much easier. That just means that Donald Trump, in a position of power, had to do some shit untoward. He had to try to stop an active investigation. That's obstruction of justice. Way easier to do. Because you have a lot of people that are looking in, that are watching every movement being made on somebody that is in the White House. Not to say that Donald Trump wasn't a carefully tracked person when he was a candidate. Of course he was. But if you're talking about collusion with Russia, then you are always going to be dealing with one side of this that ain't going to help you. Russia ain't going to reach out and help Robert Mueller. It just ain't going to happen unless it does. In that case, Robert Mueller would have way more than we know now. And meanwhile, General Flynn has been like doing some very weird tweeting like Sun Tzu Art of War quotes and shit. He's a weird dude. And we still have beef, Flynn. Don't think we don't. Don't think we don't have beef. Mueller might be letting you off scot-free, but I still haven't forgotten that time that you kept me up fucking 2 extra hours at the goddamn Republican National Convention because you wanted to soak up the goddamn adoration of the crowd of the Quicken Loans Arena. Coming up next, it is Cohen and Manafort's sentencing. And again, what you really want to watch in this is what Mueller is saying they said to him. That's going to start to get us a fuller and fuller and fuller picture. But either Mueller doesn't think he can prove obstruction of justice, or he's playing real possum with it. Because that's where I would have assumed he would have went, because he's boys with Comey. And Comey's the one that is all butthurt about the fact that, you know, he got fired from his dream job. God, I swear to God, I really want to play this Sarah McLachlan song if it wouldn't get this fucking video banned from YouTube. I will remember you. Oh, man. Guys, we would have had such a more fun primary season. Michael Avenatti tweets yesterday. Please see my set. You can feel my energy. I'm just... I don't want to read it. You have to read it, Justin. But I don't want to. Michael Avenatti, at Michael Avenatti on Twitter. Please see my statement below regarding 2020. After consulting with my family and at their request, I have decided not to seek the presidency of the United States in 2020. I don't make this decision lightly. I make it out of respect for my family, but for their concerns, I would run. I will continue to represent Stormy Daniels and others against Donald Trump and his cronies. I will not rest until Trump is removed from office and our republic and its values are restored. I will also continue with my nearly 20 years of speaking truth to power and representing those who don't need an advocate against the powerful. I remain concerned that the Democratic Party will move toward nominating an individual who will make an exceptional president but has no chance of actually beating Donald Trump. The party must immediately recognize that many of the likely candidates are not battle-tested and are no chance of winning. We will not prevail in 2020 without a fighter. I remain hopeful the party. Everybody who is running in 2020 should be sending a Christmas ham to Michael Avenatti. You want to know why? Because Michael Avenatti has, one move. Yeah, one move. Brutality. What is Michael Avenatti going to bring to a primary? Pain. What he says in this tweet is true, that he really wants to fight Donald Trump. He wants to be a fighter. He wants to punch back. He oftentimes wants to punch before Donald Trump can think about punching. What he does not say, and the reason why he deserves at least 20 hams to his doorstep should he not run, is that he would have tested that out on literally everybody running. I've described Donald Trump's run to the White House as a aggro strategy. In many video games, or games of chance or strategy, not chance, strategy, there are times when defenses get too sophisticated. When you are too busy trying to counter the counter, the counter, the counter, the counter. You're trying to think 15 steps ahead. And so you fail to realize that you really could just punch him in the mouth. Donald Trump did. I don't think that this is necessarily a replicable strategy, but I do know that if there's any time that people are going to try to replicate it, it's going to be in 2020. Donald Trump literally just got up on stage and said the shit that was being said amongst regular people about these candidates. He called, Jeb low energy. I mean, guess he kind of is. Called Marco Rubio Lil Marco, belaying the fact that he didn't have much experience. He would have been the youngest senator since Obama to become the president. Michael Avenatti would have done the same. Now, would it have gotten him the presidency? I don't think so. Ultimately, I believe that Donald Trump became president because he was running against the second most unpopular person to ever run for president. And he ran a better campaign. But if you think for 1 second that Michael Avenatti wouldn't have got up on stage and called Bernie old, Biden old, Cory Booker a blowhard, he would have made fun of Elizabeth Warren for crazy DNA test. If you think that that shit wouldn't have happened, you're kidding yourself. So Christmas hams, a big train of Christmas hams to Michael Avenatti's place. Now, why did Michael Avenatti drop out? It ain't because of his fucking family. Get the fuck out of my face with that. He's dropping out because he can't raise money and he lost all of his connections. He currently is facing a domestic violence charge that's still hanging around that seems fairly credible. And he is at a weird crossroads with his client that brought him to fame, Stormy Daniels. Like, you can't raise money like that. You can't go to a rich person. You can't go to all the small money donors in America and say, hey, please give me money. I might be in jail for dragging my girlfriend out of our apartment, but, give me money. I'll be mean to other Democrats. Like, that's why he's not running. I mean, come on. That is, if he's not running, conspiracy. Psst, 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 psst. A very wise friend of mine told me to remember the lessons of Mr. Olympia, 1980. Yes, Mr. Olympia, 1980. Now, I'm sure that all of you know off the top of your heads exactly the lessons of Mr. Olympia, 1980, right? Mr. Olympia 1980 took place in Australia. It was the first Mr. Olympia since Arnold Schwarzenegger had retired from professional bodybuilding. He was currently in training for his a breakout role for him, 1982's Conan the Barbarian. He was employed by NBC to be a color commentator for the Mr. Olympia broadcast, which had become so popular because of Arnold Schwarzenegger. So he shows up to Australia, and he's looking surprisingly jacked. And everybody says, man, that's kind of weird. Isn't it kind of weird that Arnold looks fucking like so jacked he could probably still enter the competition? Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger was training in secret for Mr. Olympia. He entered the competition one day before the competition started. He won Mr. Olympia 1980. So, let's go back to Michael Avenatti. Let's say that he can't win, he can't raise money right now. That's just not something that's going to happen. Let's say that he still has to wait for all this domestic violence stuff to kind of flush out. And let's say that everybody does start flowing in, and by the time that the primaries roll around, we're already going to have probably seen double-digit debates with this gigantic class of Democratic hopefuls. And let's say none of them necessarily have broken out. And in the meantime, Michael Avenatti is saying all the shit you'd expect somebody who should be running to say. You want to know what? I wish one of these people up on stage would say the kind of things that Michael Avenatti is saying on cable news. And then right before Iowa, he says, well, you know, all the speculation about whether or not I was going to run makes me wonder, maybe I should run. And next thing you know, he's caucus bound. I mean, that's if we heed the lessons of the 1980 Mr. Olympia competition. All right. We have a picture that I would like for all of you to see. I need for all of you to see this picture. I need for you to take a look at it because I loved it. It is a picture from the George H.W. Bush funeral today. It portrays our three most, Donald Trump and Melania, Barack and Michelle Obama, and Bill and Hillary Clinton. And then down at the end, it is the Fords. And then apparently some viral marketing right behind Bill Clinton for the new movie about Dick Cheney. I want you to look at this. I want you to look at this photo. And I just want you to write in to theyoungamerican@gmail.com what first comes to your mind when you see this photo. Because I had a few things that came to my mind when I saw this photo. I just looked at it. And the first thing that I thought was, that has to be like showing up to an STD clinic and finding all of your exes also in the waiting room. That's how thrilled everybody looks. That's so like that is the kind of excitement that is going on that bench right there. This has to be what happens when all 6 people nervously fart at the exact same time. Like, it kind of echoes. Like, if you're trying to sync audio, and you kind of hear, like, sort of like it echoes and everything. Like, that's the reaction you make if everybody farts at the exact same time. And now you're basking in all of it. What I thought of when I saw this is what it means to be anti-peripheral vision truthers. They are just dead ahead. I don't even think they're called horse blinders, and they've got something to say about our field of vision. Dead ahead. Jimmy Carter's on the end saying, anyone want a mint? Anyone want a mint? Hillary? Bill? Michelle? Barry? Melnina? Donald? Mint? No mints, I guess. But the final thing I thought of looking at this photo was, you want to know what? Probably still better than being the president of France. We have a very special edition. By the way, it is with a heavy heart that we do report some news. The patron saint of this following segment had a very traumatic day. Our patron saint, presidential historian Cardi B, has announced via Instagram that she is separating from her husband of less than a year, Offset. We at the Politics podcast wish her happy sales for her daughter, and her soon-to-be separated husband. But we have to double things up because this is a very special edition of a segment we like to have here on the show. Yes, folks, we are going back into time. This is a pole dance from March 3rd, 1991. And it is for the presidential approval
Get on the floor if you got that booty.
Yes, folks, this is a March 3rd, 1991 presidential approval poll. Stepping up first to the stage with 3%, we have with 7% of the poll. Stepping up next, it is but your headliner. Please give a big round of applause. Oh, so many years later, for an 89% approved. Again, that is 3% undecided, 7% disapprove, 89% approved. For George H.W. Bush on March 3rd, 1991. That was the highest that presidential approvals had gotten at the time. He set the record, 89% approval rating. That was after the Gulf War. It would only be broken once by his son, George W. Bush, 91% approval after 9/11. But for a while, he held the strap there. That was 89%, man. Think about that now. I think the highest that Obama got was like the mid-60s. I think Clinton was around the same. That takes a lot. That takes a real, that is certainly an achievement. All right, let's go ahead and get into but your emails. You can go ahead and email into the show, theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Again, theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Andrew wrote in, I love your show. I do. But damn, son, what you got right there, comparing clips from Fox and MSNBC, is one hell of a goddamn false equivalency. Geraldo corrected the president by saying that not all Mexicans are criminals and rapists. What's-his-face from MSNBC just said there were a lot of men there, too. Jeez! Thank you very much, Andrew. The only equivalency I was saying is that both of those points drew context to a larger conversation, and that the ideologically opposite side found that as an occasion to dunk on those networks. While I am no stranger to dunking on both of those networks, I just found it odd because I thought that they, instead of looking at it as saying, hey, look, cool, context, whether I'm not saying that they're the same. One was actual reporting. The other was just a gas bag opinion. I'm saying that they were both more context. And instead of looking at it as more context, the majority of what I read was, ha ha, fuck you, not being able to stick to your narrative, which I found odd. That's all I was saying. James writes, what do you think of New York State Bill S919, giving up your social media account information to law enforcement to renew or get a gun license? Text of bill. Relates to requiring social media and search engine reviews prior to the approval of an application or renewal of a license to carry or possess a pistol or revolver. Requires a person applying for a license to carry or possess a pistol or revolver or a renewal of such license to consent to having his or her social media accounts and search engine history reviewed and investigated for certain posts and or searches over a period of 1 to 3 years prior to the approval of such application or renewal. Defines terms. So I'm not in love with making it a law. I don't know what you could legally do if they just decided to start reviewing your social media. 1 to 3 years seems a bit aggressive. But despite the fact that I do think it is creepily kind of infringing on your liberties, the majority of that is because it's forcing you to give it up. Now, any state, in my opinion, can define exactly how they want to license firearms. New York has very stringent laws, but I think this is kind of an overreach. Aside from the fact that they don't really define in there exactly what they're looking for, nor do they give you any recourse to explain anything if something is misjudged. So effectively, if something is taken out of context by the government, they can deny you an ability to possess a firearm for up to 3 years. It seems like bad news brown to me, but, to each their own. Not my favorite. Sean writes, can I get a jury take on the George H.W. Bush praise through this lens? H.W. made huge lasting impacts on the U.S. On the world stage. His lack of attention on domestic issues were his downfall. I'm 30, and I've never looked back at the H.W. administration. I learned today that H.W. was responsible for NAFTA. Congress passed it after Clinton was president, but I always thought that NAFTA was from Bill. The news talks about H.W. being there when the Berlin Wall fell and as the Soviet republics emerged into their own countries. He also helped open China to the West. Of all the negative things I hear about our domestic aids, it was worldwide, but steps could have been taken to do more for our domestic sufferers. And the U.S. economy hurt him along with U.S. taxes. Is the one-line story of George H.W. Bush good global president, but bad domestic president. I don't know if ever it were so simple. I think that there is a lot of high-level international relations that he does deserve a lot of credit for. We should live in such a blessed world as I have for the majority of my life, where the Cold War was something of the past. I never really grew up thinking that we were going to be obliterated by a nuclear holocaust. Pretty much everybody I know that is substantially older than me has. And for that, George H.W. Bush needs to be the caretaker of the man that de-escalated it to the point where it is now, where we just have to worry about Russia buying Facebook ads. I think that that's a positive. Domestically, there are a lot of things that haven't aged very well. I think that it is shameful what happened, to make a political point about, there was a dude who was set up, entrapped effectively, to sell crack to a DEA agent across the street from the White House. He wasn't normally selling crack at the White House. He just happened. The DEA brought him in to do it. The drug dealer was later went to jail, and part of that arrest was held on his record. He was kind of a famous person. So I thought that's ugly. I don't know if you can be president without fucking some shit up. The power is too large. You're an elephant trying to move around in a knick-knack shop. Shit's gonna get knocked over. The hope is you wind up doing more harm than good. And I think that's how we should look at it. Now, he is politically, which is what we usually look at here, he is politically remembered most for a promise to the conservative wing of his party that he would not raise taxes. Read my lips and all that. He then was not able to make a deal with his own party, and he had to make a deal across the aisle. That involved raising taxes. Now, he raised taxes with the promise that they would cut, like for every $1 of tax increase, they would cut $2 of federal spending, which is something that, if that happened today, it would be like, yes, hardline fiscal responsibility. John Stossel would just be stroking it. But back then, it was a betrayal. That's what he's remembered for. That high point, that 98, a reminder that he lost a fucking election after that. It takes some doing. So I always hope that we can kind of strive to look into a little bit more context. And so I would encourage everybody to investigate the foreign policy of George H.W. Bush, including, by the way, the bad. Gulf War was primarily fought because not only did we think that the Iraqis taking Kuwait was a bad idea, but Saudi Arabia was kind of like, what's going to happen? And the Bushes have a tremendous relationship with the Saudi royal family. That's something that probably doesn't age well. Dare I say it's more of a favor to Saudi Arabia than not spiking our relationship because of the Khashoggi murder. But also I think that he did more of good on the domestic front to just say he was a bad domestic president. But hell, that's just one man's opinion.
Politics, 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 politics.
All right, everybody. I want to remind everybody, free political newsletter. Free political newsletter at freepoliticalnewsletter.com. Go ahead and get it. We still have all these great deals on The Contender, my card game. Throughout the holidays, head on over to thecontender.us. You can email theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Music has been provided by Valesco and Trop Killers. Follow me at Justin R. Young everywhere. And, of course, download archived episodes of this show at bonerwars.com. Folks, that about wraps it up for today. I would like to remind you, some shows talk about politics. Others talk about politics. Still more talk about politics. But this right here is the only show that talks about all three.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.